Okay. So welcome everybody to our financial aid presentation. We are going to cover quite a bit tonight in terms of the FAFSA, which is the free application for federal student aid. We will also be able to answer questions that you might have right now. With me, we have several of our colleagues from both admissions and from enrollment services, with financial aid specialists, admissions specialists, and billing specialists in the room. So please do, throughout the presentation, use the chat function to ask any questions that you have. I do want to let you know that the way that this is set up, it appears that the chat can be seen by everybody. So please do not put any personal information into the chat. If you do have personal questions that you would not want to be shared with everybody, please do feel free to contact us in enrollment services during the week. We will be sharing contact information with you, and we're more than happy to sit one-on-one with anybody who would like to talk about their individual financial aid situations. So just to let you know who's in the room with you, you may not be able to see everybody, but we have Beth and Erin from admissions, and we also have Carrie and Kristen from enrollment services. And all of them will be answering questions that you have throughout the presentation. So again, please do use that chat functionality and feel free to ask questions throughout. You don't need to worry about interrupting. We are ready to answer anything that you have that comes up throughout the presentation. So let's get started. So first off, let me introduce myself. I do realize that I forgot to do that. So my name is Vicki McNeil. I'm the Director of Financial Aid and Enrollment Services at the University of Rhode Island. And on behalf of all of us, I just want to say thank you for coming and welcome. We do realize that for those of you who have seen anything in the news about the FAFSA, that free application for federal student aid, that there's a lot going on this year. It is an abnormal year in terms of the delays that have happened. It was a complete overhaul of the application and federal formulas this year. And so you may be in this room because you're having trouble completing the FAFSA. If that is the case, just know you're not alone, and we will be able to continue to work with you. We will make sure that everybody has the opportunity to see what financial aid they're eligible for as they're making those very important enrollment decisions. So here's a snapshot of what we're going to cover tonight. We're going to talk about an overview of applying for financial aid. We will actually go through screenshots from the FAFSA, which is the only application that students need to apply for all types of financial aid at the University of Rhode Island. We'll talk about what happens after the FAFSA is complete and those financial aid awards start coming into play. We will briefly cover if you happen to have a special or unusual circumstance that many do. We'll talk about what you can do to make sure that those situations are addressed and that we can answer questions for you. And we'll also have a little bit of time for Q&A at the end, should you wish to have any of your questions answered directly by me. But again, please do utilize that chat functionality. Everybody is ready and able to answer anything that you throw at them right now. So something that I do just want to mention on the FAFSA. So again, free application for federal student aid. The websites are right here. Either of those websites will get you to the right place. And again, that's the only application that we require at the University of Rhode Island. But if this is your first time going through the FAFSA, so this is your first child for which you're applying for financial aid, if you're a parent, or you're the first student to go through this process with your family, first know that it does get much easier in future years. This is an abnormally challenging year, like I mentioned, but it will be far easier and things will not be delayed in future years. So you'll be able to start actually completing the FAFSA next year as soon as October 1st, rather than having to wait until this time frame. Also, we normally do receive the results of the FAFSA as soon as they are completed. There is a delay right now where we're not getting the FAFSA results until the middle of March from the U.S. Department of Education. But in normal years, those will come through very soon after, and we'll be able to assist you through knowing what the status of your FAFSA is in future years. If this is not your first time going through the FAFSA, you will notice changes. It should be easier for you to go through. There are things like a direct data exchange with the IRS that will pull income information in directly, so you don't need to type in all of the things that you would have had to have done in the past. You also will notice that the structure is different. There are a lot of things that are different, which is why we're going to go through slide by slide. So whether this is your first time going through, or if this is something that you have done in the past, you'll be able to see what to expect throughout the application. One more thing I do want to mention is the FAFSA always runs 2 years behind in terms of the income information that it is using. So for families who are entering in the fall of 2024, it's going to be using your tax information from 2022. And next year in fall of 2025, it'll be using tax data from 2023. So you're not seeing something incorrect if you go in there and it's talking about taxes from 2 years ago. That actually is how things work with the free application for federal student aid. So for those of you who have been through this process before, I do want to just highlight a couple of the big changes from prior years that you will want to know about. First, you were used to getting this number at the end of the FAFSA called an EFC, or expected family contribution. That is now called an SAI, or student aid index. It is the same representation of the number in that it's a calculation of an estimated family financial strength as it relates to other families who would be going through the process. And that number, the SAI, which used to be the EFC, is what colleges determine how much financial aid you're eligible for and which types of financial aid you qualify for. So again, that's a name change, but it's also a change to some of the formulas behind the scenes. One thing that I'm sure if you've been paying attention in the news, you have heard about, especially if this impacts you, is that the FAFSA asks you still how many students are in college at the same time, but that number is no longer taken into consideration in the federal and institutional financial aid formulas. So that's something that you'll definitely want to be aware of if you've been through this before. And if you find that this ends up being problematic for you in terms of your family's ability to pay, and there are other things that are happening at the same time, you will want to contact our office to make sure that we're aware of your situation so that we can see where we might be able to work together, not on the federal side, but definitely on the institutional side if that ends up causing an issue. One more change from last year that's pretty major is that small businesses and farms are no longer excluded from the application. They are considered assets of the family. So in the past, if a small business was had fewer than 100 employees, then you did not need to list that. From now on, you do have to list the value of the business and any value of a family farm, should that be something that applies to your particular situation. So let's get started with how you actually apply for financial aid using the FAFSA form. The very first step before you start to log into the FAFSA is called an FSA ID. Now, FSA just stands for Federal Student Aid, and it is synonymous with the term studentaid.gov account. The .gov.gov at the end of the website just means that it's a government federal website. And in order to access the FAFSA for both the student and the parent, in the case of a dependent student, you will need to create this FSA ID before you can get in there. This really is just a way to verify the identity of the person who is accessing the federal applications. Both the student and their parent, if they are a dependent student, will need to create their own FSA ID. The website is right up here, studentaid.gov, with a couple of things that come right after that. If you just go to the very beginning of that website to studentaid.gov, you can also navigate to the right place. You're just looking for creation of an FSA ID. Something to know, if you have not gone through the FSA ID process yet and you're looking to complete the FAFSA, is that there is a delay from the time that you create this FSA ID, this username and password, and the time that you're able to access the FAFSA. So just give yourself a couple of days if you are just getting started right now. And other important information that you should know about is that there are a few items, specific items that you will be required to have when you're creating this FSA ID. And that includes the full legal name, your social security number, if you have one. If a parent does not have a social security number, that does not impact a student's eligibility for financial aid, and the date of birth of the person who is creating the FSA ID. And it's very important that all of these match what is on the Social Security Administration. So whatever you have that is attached to your Social Security number, just make sure everything is entered properly to make sure that there won't be any issues later on regarding the identity of the person who is entering all of this data. So once you have that FSA ID, you're ready to go into the actual FAFSA form. And these are a few items that you will need in order to successfully get through the FAFSA form. So again, I mentioned before that both the student and the contributors is just a term that they use for, generally speaking, parents of dependent students, spouse of a student in the case of an independent student, if applicable. Both of those FSA IDs will be required. You will need, again, to be using your tax information from 2022. If you filed taxes, in most cases, you won't need to actually enter the data from your tax return, but you will want to have a familiarity with that year's taxes to make sure that you're putting the right information in if you are not able to use the direct data exchange through the IRS. If child support has come into play and you have received child support, you'll need to know that amount. You'll need to know your current value of your cash savings and checking accounts, as well as an estimate of the net worth of investments, rental properties, businesses, and farms. This does specifically exclude your family home. So if you just have one family home and you don't have any investment properties, you do not need to report anything about that home when you're completing the FAFSA. And again, as I mentioned before, legal name, social security number, date of birth. You also will need to know the email address of your parent if you're the student who's going through the process. This gives you a little idea about what the flow of all of this looks like once you put all of these pieces together. I know I'm throwing a lot of things at you, from federal student aid ID to FAFSA to contributors and all of these strange terms that are really only used in financial aid. So this will just give you an idea of how all of this will go when you put it together. So you're going to start this entire presentation assumes that the student is walking through the FAFSA first. It is possible for parents to begin the FAFSA also, but that will just be a slightly different flow from what you'll see tonight. The student goes in, they enter the FAFSA using their FSA ID. That's how they access it again. They'll complete their demographic and income information, as well as if they have any assets. And then the student is asked in the application to invite their contributors, again, meaning in most cases the parent, to complete their portion of the FAFSA. And they do need to have the parent's legal name, social security number if they have one, date of birth, and email address in order to get that invitation out to the contributor, again, parent in most cases. The contributors then receive an email requesting that they log into the FAFSA to complete the FAFSA, their portion of the FAFSA, on behalf of the student. And then that person completes the FAFSA, and then that is how everything goes up till the very end. But I'm going to show you through screenshots so that you can see how this actually works in practice. So what you're about to see are actual screenshots from the FAFSA. We have a student worker who very graciously went through and took screenshots as she was completing her FAFSA, of course, blocking out her identity information. And this shows you most of the pages that you will actually see in the FAFSA, which is much shorter than it has been in the past, which is great news for those of you who have done this before. I do want to mention there is skip logic throughout the process, meaning that you may not see all of the pages that I'm going to show you, because if a situation does not apply to you based on the answers to your questions, you won't see the screens that are not applicable to your particular situation. But in this case, let's assume I've gotten it into the FAFSA form. I logged in using my FSA ID, that Federal Student Aid ID from studentaid.gov. And I'm saying I'm starting the FAFSA form as a student. So I would click on student, and then it's going to ask me for some information, and it's going to have most of this pre-populated for you. So the student, because they already are linked up through that Federal Student Aid FSA ID, that FSA ID, it's going to already pull in the student information that it knows. So they already know your name, your date of birth, your social security number, and they want to confirm that that's actually accurate before you get started. So please do take a look when you're doing this part, make sure everything looks good, that your email address is the one that you actually want to receive communications at, as well as your mobile phone number, so that if you have enabled text messaging, that it will come to the right place. And then you're going to enter in the student's permanent mailing address and click continue. The next thing that they ask is about the student's state of legal residence and when they became a legal resident. This is used for the purpose of state grants in many states. So put in that information and move on. Now come the terms and conditions that we're all accustomed to seeing on many different websites. This is something that you will want to read through because it is very important to understand what's happening behind the scenes in this. And this is different than it has been in the past. So what they're asking in this case is that ED, which is code for the US Department of Education, is going to connect directly with the IRS and pull your tax information directly from the IRS. This is a little bit different than it was done in the past, where you were asked to transfer your information in. Now you're not even going to see most of that happening. So what's going to happen is throughout the FAFSA, it's going to connect directly to the IRS. You will not be asked most of the income questions because it is going to pull it directly off of your 2022 tax return. Do know that if you say no to this, so they're asking you to provide consent, unfortunately, it's not optional consent. So if you do say no to this, the student won't be eligible for any federal financial aid and cannot complete the FAFSA. But by saying yes to this, just make sure that you actually do agree to these terms and conditions, which the most important piece, again, is that it's pulling directly from the IRS tax return straight into the FAFSA. The next question that will be asked, it's going to let you know that it's going to walk you through some different situations regarding personal circumstances to understand more about what will be required of your particular FAFSA. The first thing that it's going to ask is the student married? In most cases, for students coming directly out of high school, the answer is likely single, never married. And so that's the one that we're going to go with in this situation. Then it wants to know about the student's college or career plans. If you're on this call, I'm guessing most of you are probably going through as first year, but if you're coming in as a transfer student, it could be a different year as well. This is a little bit, I have tips and tricks throughout here so that you don't make some of the mistakes that are common pitfalls in the FAFSA. Make sure you answer no unless you happen to have a bachelor's degree already from a prior school. Make sure you answer no to this question. That's one of the ones that commonly trips students up. And if you accidentally answered yes to this, it's going to exclude you from receiving certain types of financial aid. So again, if you are coming right out of high school, you likely do not have a bachelor's degree, and so answer no if that is the case. Next, it's going to ask about some various circumstances that could make a student independent for the terms of the FAFSA. For many students, none of these will apply, so that's what we have gone with. But just do be aware that there are questions about whether you're on active duty in the U.S. Armed Forces, if you were in foster care at any point, which definitely is a possibility, if the student is in a legal guardianship as determined by a court. So just know that there are questions, and this is just to find out whose information do we actually need on this FAFSA. Is it just the student, or is it the student and the parent, or the student and the spouse? We're going to answer none of these apply. And then the next question it asks is, at any time, if the student was considered unaccompanied, homeless, or at risk of being homeless. In this particular case, we're going to answer no. And then it asks you about what they call unusual circumstances. That's just federal terminology, the way that they say that. They want to know if you are in a situation as the student that would mean that it would be not in your best interest to contact your parents. So an abusive situation, a threatening environment, a victim of human trafficking, those types of things. So if any of those apply to you, definitely answer yes, and then the school URI will follow up with you afterwards to get more documentation information about your situation. But if none of those apply to you, answer no, and that's how we're going to assume for this particular application. And based on the questions that you just answered, now it's going to tell you what your dependency status is. This is not necessarily the same as being a dependent on a tax return, although in many cases it is. Just know that most students who come directly out of high school do need to are required rather, to put parental information on the FAFSA as well, but it will tell you right here whether or not you need to do that. So in this case, it says, based on the answers you've given us, you are a dependent student for the FAFSA, and this means that you're going to have to provide parental information on the FAFSA. This next question is a little bit of a tricky one, and it's a new question, and I want to make sure that we call your attention to it. The wording is not to my liking, if I'm being frank. So it asks you about direct unsubsidized loan only, and it's asking you, are you only looking to apply for an unsubsidized federal loan? This means if you answer yes to this question, you will not be considered for any other types of financial aid. So please do pay attention to this question. In almost every situation, you want to answer no to this question. The only time you would answer yes is if you were in a situation where your parents' whereabouts are unknown, for example, and you absolutely cannot get them to complete it, and you're not in one of those special circumstances like at risk of being homelessness or those other types of things. So again, if you answer yes on this question, it's going to take away your eligibility for types of financial aid that you will probably want to be considered for. So in most cases, you're going to answer no to the question of direct unsubsidized loan only. And before I show you the screenshot on the next one, the next screenshot is going to ask some questions about the marital status of the parents, recognizing that many families, parents are divorced in many different families, and you'll want some guidance about who do I actually list on the FAFSA if my parents are divorced. And this actually has changed from last year. So if you've gone through this before, the question is asking you something different this year. Previously, it used to be that if your parents were divorced, whichever parent had primary custody is the one that you would be listing. Now that question has changed on the FAFSA, and they're asking about the parent who provided the most financial support to the student. So in this case, when you're choosing, and it is up to the family to make this decision, when you're choosing which of these two, which parent to put on in the case of divorced parents, it is asking you to list the parent who has provided the most financial support over the last 12 months. Also, if that parent is remarried, the step parent will also need to be listed on there. That's the same as it has been in the past. All of this information, I realize that there's a lot on this screen right here, will also be available when you're completing the FAFSA. So there are help items throughout the FAFSA to get you to this answer as well. So here's a screenshot of the actual question that's being asked. Tell us about the student's parents. Are they married to each other? Do they live together? And if the answer is no to both of those, one of them, which of them provided more financial support in this situation, and has that parent been remarried? And again, this is just to figure out who needs to be listed in terms of parents on the FAFSA. And now is the part that I mentioned that the student needs to have some parental information in order to help them get into the FAFSA after. So the student is going through right now, they're completing their portion of the FAFSA, and they need to enter information about the parents who need to be listed to enable them to be able to get an invitation from the U.S. Department of Education to say, we are inviting you to complete your portion of the FAFSA. So the parent is not going to see all of the student's information. If the parent is the one starting it, the student won't see all of their information. But students do need to have the parent's legal name, social security number if they have one, date of birth, and the email address for the parents. And then parents are going to receive an invitation again from the U.S. Department of Education. The email address from which this will come is noreply@studentaid.gov. So that is a legitimate email when it's coming through to you parents. Make sure that you're paying attention for that, please. Now that the parent has been invited, the FAFSA is going to ask a couple of questions of the student, and this part actually goes quite quickly. So the first things they ask are questions about the student's gender, the student's race, and the student's ethnicity. These are new this year. I do want to let you know these in no way, shape, or form come into the financial aid eligibility criteria, and the schools do not receive this information. So the University of Rhode Island won't see this. This is for research purposes, and it's something that Congress required that it be asked in the FAFSA this year. So again, male, female, non-binary, or prefer not to answer. Prefer not to answer is also absolutely okay, and these questions will not come to the school. And then this is what the student race and ethnicity questions look like. Again, these do not come to any of the schools to which you're applying. And now it's going to ask about the student's citizenship status. I did mention before that if the parent is not a U.S. citizen or permanent resident, that does not stop the student from being eligible for financial aid, but the student does have citizenship requirements in order to receive federal financial aid in particular. The student must be either a U.S. citizen, a permanent resident, or what's considered to be an eligible non-citizen. Those are situations such as somebody from Papua New Guinea is just one example of that. There are various items that allow federal financial aid to be received, but in most cases, the student has to either be a U.S. citizen, naturalized, included, or an eligible non-citizen. If you are a permanent resident in the United States, you will need to have your alien registration number with you, also called the A number. And that's important that that matches up to the Department of Homeland Security because they do have rather a database check that registers that number together with your information to make sure that you are eligible for federal financial aid. There is no connection to immigration beyond doing a data check on that alien registration number. And again, that's just to confirm eligibility for federal financial aid. A question is asked if the student's parent was killed in the line of duty as a member of the U.S. Armed Forces on active duty on or after September 11th of 2001, pardon me, or if they were killed in the line of duty while performing official duties as a public safety officer. This is for a special financial aid program that exists for students whose parent was killed in the line of duty in one of these specific situations. Next question is going to ask about the student's high school completion status. In most cases, you're going to say for 24-25, you will have a high school diploma. There are also students who may be here who are homeschooled or are going through a GED certificate. If any of those are applicable, just list the one that applies to your situation. And then it's going to ask you to confirm your high school. So it wants to know, where did you go to high school? Give us that information. It will give you a list to select from as soon as you list your state and city. And then you're going to go ahead and click continue. Now, at this point, the demographic information of the student is complete, and it's moving on to a couple of questions about the student's finances. As I mentioned before, in most cases, the vast majority of income questions will not be asked of the student or of the parent. And that's again because it's pulling directly from the IRS. But there are a couple of questions that are not apparent on a tax return that do need to be asked of the student. So the first question is, did you have any college grants, scholarships, or other things that were reported as income to the IRS? In most cases, for first-year students, this will not be applicable. Should you not be a first-year student, just know that this is actually to exclude those items from your income. It's not additional income from what is on the tax return. And it also asks if you have had a foreign earned income that has been excluded from the tax return. It will ask you that question as well. Now it's going to ask a couple of questions about the student's assets. So again, having that information about cash savings, checking accounts, if you have any net worth investments, if you have any investments such as real estate properties, those types of things. In many cases, that's not going to be applicable for the student, but it does ask you those questions. And then the next step is going to be to select the colleges to which you want the results of the FAFSA sent. You can choose up to 20 colleges to send the results to. Please don't forget to list the University of Rhode Island. I did list our school code up here. You don't really need the school code though. You can actually look it up just by searching for University of Rhode Island, and that will also get you to the right place. But every college that you list on here is going to receive the results of your FAFSA so that they can complete a financial aid package for you. Once that part is complete, it's going to show you where you are in the application. And in this particular case, because we've done all of the other pieces, it's going to move on to the signature section of the FAFSA. And although I'm not walking through what the signature process looks like, just know that you're just going to be doing an electronic signature, just like you probably do on other forms. And again, that's authenticated by that FSA ID that you entered at the very beginning. Some important information that it's going to display to you that I want to call your attention to. I did mention it briefly in the beginning, but it's really, really important. So I want to make sure that you know. Again, this is not a typical year, and that there were delays in the FAFSA release this year, as well as FAFSA processing on the part of the U.S. Department of Education. FAFSAs will not be processed until mid-March this year. What does that mean? That means that everybody right now, if they've already completed the FAFSA, is going to have something along the lines of that your FAFSA is still in review or in process right now. So schools are also not receiving the results of the FAFSA until mid-March. We don't know an exact date yet, but we don't actually have access to your FAFSA, even if you have already completed it at this point. In a normal year, we will have access to that and we'll be able to review where you are in the process. But for this particular year, again, we do not have the results of the FAFSA yet, and the FAFSAs have not been processed for anybody. So if you see that your FAFSA has not been processed, just know that is the case for everybody. You have not done anything wrong with that. Once that FAFSA is processed, again, starting in mid-March this year, you will receive an email from the U.S. Department of Education after completing the FAFSA that gives you what is called a FAFSA submission summary. This FAFSA submission summary will show you everything that you entered. It will show you what that SAI is at the end. Again, that's akin to what used to be called an EFC, or expected family contribution. The SAI is the student aid index. That's the results of the FAFSA, the number that schools use to determine your eligibility for financial aid. And also it will tell you if you're eligible for the federal Pell Grant. It will list that on there as well. The federal Pell Grant is one type of financial aid that is for students who show the highest levels of financial need. And if you're eligible for a federal Pell Grant, it will tell you that. And then the FAFSA results are going to be sent to all of the schools that you have listed. Once the University of Rhode Island receives your FAFSA, We are going to match that up with your admission records, assuming that you've already been admitted at this point. And we are going to say this FAFSA is for this admitted student. We're going to put all of those pieces together, and we're going to create what is called a financial aid package or a financial aid offer for you. A financial aid package is a list of all of the types of financial aid that you qualify for, as well as the amounts that you qualify for. So this will include any federal financial aid that you're eligible for. It will include, if you are a Rhode Island student, the state possible grant that you might receive. And it will also include any additional need-based financial aid that comes directly from the University of Rhode Island. So we'll put all of those pieces together. If you received a merit scholarship during the admission process, that will also show on your financial aid package. And at that point, we will send that out to you so that you know what you qualify for at the University of Rhode Island, and that will then show you what your net price would be to attend, which is just the cost of attendance, subtracting out your financial aid so that you can see what it would cost you to attend the University of Rhode Island for 1 year. At that point, once you have received your financial aid offers, you're going to be confirming your admission with a deposit, depending on which school you choose to go to. Usually May 1st is the deadline for completing that confirmation deposit. And I do also want to mention that in terms of the financial aid package at the University of Rhode Island, we don't send anything in the mail. What we do is our admission office will send an email to the student and tell them that their financial aid package is ready for viewing. And that's actually going to be viewed at the University of Rhode Island in that same applicant portal that you use to view your admission letter. So again, don't expect to receive anything in the mail from us. We will send an email to the student telling them their financial aid offer is ready for viewing, and then the student can share that with the parent at that point. And as I promised earlier, I also do want to mention that we recognize that in some situations, you may have personal financial conditions that cannot be documented on the FAFSA. So if you have a unique condition, something that is what you consider to be a special circumstance, so if the student is not able to obtain parental information, cases of divorce after completion of the FAFSA, loss of employment, those types of things, we do want to know about it so that we can make sure we're offering you the best possible financial aid package. If you have one of those situations, please contact the school by email. I'll show you that in the next slide, all of our contact information, and we'll tell you if that's the type of circumstance that may qualify you for special consideration. In those cases, we'll tell you where to go to complete a form, as well as giving us additional documentation so that we can review your financial situation in totality rather than just what is listed on the FAFSA. So I'm going to leave it here for a moment so that you can see all of the ways to contact us after this presentation. So again, I mentioned I'm the Director of Financial Aid. I'm part of Enrollment Services. Enrollment Services at the University of Rhode Island is what we call a one-stop shop that takes care of all of financial aid, student employment, billing and collections, registration, records, all of those things, which is great having a one-stop shop because that means if you contact us, you don't need to know, is this a question for the bursar or is this a question for financial aid? You will give us a call, you'll send us an email, and we'll be able to get you the answers that you need. And if for some reason we need to bring it to somebody else in the office, we'll be able to get you to the right place in a seamless, easy way. We have very knowledgeable staff throughout Enrollment Services who can answer financial aid questions, billing questions, any questions that you might have about those types of services at the University of Rhode Island. I did list an email address on here. It's enrollment-group@uri.edu. If you want to send us an email, that is the way to get the fastest service. This is a group of professionals who are answering and monitoring this email address on a daily basis. So they will get you quick responses, they will get you accurate responses, and that is the best way for you to get a hold of us. We also have a telephone number that's listed here. And if you have a situation where you really would like to sit one-on-one with somebody in Enrollment Services to talk about your specific situation, you absolutely can do that. We're more than happy to make appointments to meet with you through virtual means such as Zoom, or you can stop by our office at any point that we're open as well. But again, do please contact us with any questions that you have, any concerns that you have, or if you have a special situation that you would like to tell us about, please let us know. We are more than happy to help, and we're really excited to work with all of the families who are interested in possibly attending the University of Rhode Island.